2020, everybody! Not only is it a new year, but a new decade, so you know what that means. New decade, new me. Yeah, not much has really changed. But before we go into the new decade, let's look back at the last year of the tens, or tweens, 2000, tweens, I don't really know. But here are going to be my top 10 favorite movies of 2019. And just like my previous videos, this list is going to be composed of theatrically released movies that were released in 2019. They're personally my favorite movies. You're going to have your own opinions. These are my opinions. But you know what? Everyone's entitled to their own opinions, so... And if you saw my video last year, my top 10 favorite movies of 2018, I saw a record-breaking 88 movies. And this year, I once again broke that record with a whopping 99 movies. Oh God, what am I doing with my life? But overall for 2019, this was a surprisingly weird year for movies for me, because I felt like for the first half of the year, not a lot of movies really spoke out or wowed me, and then in the second half of the year, especially from September to the end of the year, there were so many individual movies that just wowed me that really proved, wow, 2019 was a phenomenal year for film, and I cannot wait to discuss them with you. And before I start off my list, let me just run off some honorable mentions of films I really did like this year, but sadly just didn't make the cut. And those films do include Godzilla, King of the Monsters, Midsummer, Ad Astra, Hustlers, Us, The Good Liar, Knives Out, Richard Jewell, Late Night, How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, Ready or Not, Fighting with My Family, Joker, The Peanut Butter Falcon, and Dolomite Is My Name. Now we have those out of the way, let us start my top 10 favorite movies of 2019 with number 10. And number 10 is... Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame was one of the few movies I actually did review this year, and if you saw my review back then, you know I really liked Avengers Endgame. It was almost the perfect culmination for this entire Marvel saga. It had absolutely amazing action, acting. I love the storylines and threads that the Russo brothers, and especially Kevin Feige, carried over from all these 22 films. For me to go more in depth with my feelings, of course you can watch my review that's on my channel, but overall I did have an absolute blast with Avengers Endgame. But no, it's not a perfect film. I still do have with issues with Professor Hulk, and while I do appreciate more what they did with Thor's character, I don't like how much the movie treated him as a joke, even though I do love the factor of PTSD with this character. I'm not a big fan of using a 2014 Thanos who doesn't really know the Avengers and vice versa, and just like Avengers Infinity War, this movie doesn't really have full characters in which we aren't really introduced and conclude the characters in the movie. But it's Avengers Endgame, we've known these characters forever, so as the movie itself, the movie didn't need those character arcs, but at the same time, as a single movie itself, it needs some of those character arcs. Nevertheless, I still think that this is an awe-inspiring movie, one that cannot be replicated for many, many years. Coming in at number 9 is Marriage Story. For some people, this may be surprisingly low on this list, and maybe over time I might change my opinion on this movie, but that's mainly because I did just watch this movie last night, less than 12 hours ago. This movie is still fresh in my mind with its themes, its characters, its ideas, so I may not have had enough time to process this movie, but there's still so much that I absolutely adored about this movie. Of course, Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson's performances are one to talk about. They're absolutely grounded in reality, and they feel so realistic, and I love the way that they could build such a tame basic scene into such a high-octane argument that we, the audience, are fully invested in. And I think this is mainly due to Noah Baumbach's direction and script, because he's so persistent on every single beat, cough, mistake that a character's dialogue may have in this movie. Everything is so intentional, and this just all adds to the realism of the movie, which I think this movie absolutely nails, because this feels like such a realistic movie, whether it's in its tame cinematography, where it's not every single shot and every single scene needs to be had. There could be long takes of characters who walk off screen and come back, or just a long single take of a character. I did love the unique take on the cinematography, and the score from Randy Newman also, while it does feel a lot like Toy Story because it's Randy Newman, I did love the lighthearted romanticism of it that it would have in a marriage, and also how that score is contradicted by this marriage that is breaking apart. I thought it was really well done. Probably the only reason why this movie isn't higher on my list than I would want it to be is the use of its characters with Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, because I feel like this movie is mostly one-sided with Scarlett Johansson's character, where we understand what makes her a great character and her flaws. Both Adam Driver, we just know more of his flaws, and we don't really have that much to really like about his character, except the fact that he keeps trying to be a good father, but in that aspect, even when he's trying to be, he's not the best father, and he's self-centered, which is his flaw in the movie, but there's nothing really to counter that flaw into something that likable, and by the end, I feel like the movie was kind of confused on what type of tone it wanted to have with its characters and their likability. But then again, I only saw this movie once. After reading into it more, I may like it more. Who knows? Next up, at number 8 on my list is Just Mercy. This movie was definitely one I was not really going into thinking this was going to be one of my favorites of the year, but Look at me now! This movie starring Michael B. Jordan is about a lawyer who's trying to get people who are on death row off death row in regards to various social justice issues that are happening in our world today. And yes, this is a movie with a story, themes, and tone that we've seen before, and while going in this movie, I knew I've seen this all before. There's nothing new to the emotions here, but the emotions worked and they kind of won me over by the end, because not only are the performances very good in this movie, especially by Jamie Foxx with the great performances, the overall heartwarming feeling at the end of the movie. It's the movie's narrative that really kept me invested in the movie, because along the way, the more we're discovering about Jamie Foxx's case, there's just another twist and turn that happened in the story and his real life that you really just can't believe it, but this all happened and really just makes you want to root for the characters more, and in the end, it won me. Next up, number 7 on my list is probably one that's going to be very controversial for this list, but it is the Lego Movie 2, the second part. I'm a big fan of Chris Lord and Phil Miller. That's not their names. I'm a big fan of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who directed the first Lego Movie. I love the first Lego Movie. Absolutely love the animation, the style, the humor, and I thought that it blended very well together, and so I was really excited for the second movie, and even though the two of them aren't directing this movie, they still wrote it and produced it, and a lot of those elements I love from the first movie still carry over to this second one. The story, the heart, the animation's absolutely beautiful, and of course the humor is on point in this movie. And while the Lego Movie 2 isn't at the same high quality as other movies lower on this list, personally for me, I so adored this movie, thought that it once again was visually beautiful, and I absolutely love the humor, and I only wish it came out 2 or 3 years earlier. Next up at number 6 on my list, this is where the movies of the year actually started to wow me, and the first movie to actually wow me of the year was Booksmart. This was another movie that I reviewed early in the year. It was Olivia Wilde's directorial debut, and sadly this movie was overlooked as the months went on, especially in its initial box office run, but there's still so much I adore in this movie in regards to its acting, the comedy, the chemistry between Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Dever. It's 7 months and I still don't know how to pronounce her name. But beyond the chemistry and the comedy in the movie, it is the bond between Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Dever's character that I did absolutely love, and the unique takes with the style of direction, cinematography that Olivia Wilde had that makes this one movie that should never be forgotten. Next up, number 5 on my list is Toy Story 4. I grew up in the 2000s, so of course I watched Toy Story 1 and 2 all the time, and I did absolutely love Toy Story 3. It was the perfect ending, so why is there Toy Story 4? That's a good question that the movie faces, and overall I think that the movie did a good job at stating its place of saying we need this movie, and while I still don't think it's absolutely necessary, it does still give a great conclusion for Woody's storyline in the Toy Story saga. While I'm still not a big fan of the Buzz Lightyear storyline, feeling it really dumbs down his character, the one thing I absolutely love this movie, which is why it's so high on my list probably, is the animation, because Pixar has stepped up their game with the animation. There are some shots in this movie that I feel are straight out of real life. The animation in this movie is absolutely beautiful and definitely helps this movie be placed 5th for my top 2019 movies. Coming in at number 4 on my list is Uncut Gems. Wow. This movie was intense. I did recently watch Good Times, also directed by the Safdie brothers, and was not a big fan of that movie overall, even though I did love the performances. So going into this movie, I heard a lot of great things about Adam Sandler's performances, so I at least was expecting great performances from the cast, and not only did I get great performances from the cast, especially from Adam Sandler, but I got such an intense thrill ride that's due for the Safdie brothers' very precise editing, the overall 80s score of the movie that either works well in the scenes or contradicts itself, as well as the overlaying dialogue and conversations that happen in this movie that just build the intensity and make for the entire runtime of this movie very unsettling for much of the audience. This is pretty much a movie where everything goes wrong and everything does go wrong, and I think that for the most part it works very well, because Adam Sandler's character is not a character that we're supposed to like, and that's the point. Actually, none of the characters we're supposed to like, and that's the entire point, but there's still so many moments in the movie where you're hooked in because there's a bet being placed, and even though you may not be a big fan or like the characters, you're so invested because of how well the Safdie brothers directed this movie. And while I did absolutely love almost every element about this movie, I think the big part being held back from me is that, as I said before, there is no likable character. Even Adam Sandler's character is such a flawed character. There's no redeeming quality to his character, so when he does something horrible, you don't really know what to do because you can't root for him, and you don't really feel happy liking anyone in this movie because no one is that likable. And because of that, it does make this movie a bit hard to watch at times, but nevertheless, I feel that Uncut Gems is an absolutely intense roller coaster of emotions that I highly recommend. Next up at number 3 on my list is probably one of the best movies of the decade, and that is Parasite. This is actually one of the few movies that I went to go in not knowing absolutely anything about this movie, and I think that is the best way to experience this movie, because this is a subtitled South Korean film. That's not my preference for movies that I want to go see, but there's something about the story and the narrative of this movie, of how it eventually builds on each other and how relatable it is, that's so endearing in this movie that just kept me as an audience member hooked for the entire time. This movie was surprisingly comedic, is very fast paced, and I think that's mainly due to Bong Joon-ho's direction and movement that happens in this movie in regards to its characters or its camera camera work that happens throughout the house, because the house in this movie is basically another character. I do absolutely love the underlying theme of class that happened in this movie and the ultimate surprise and twists and turns that we experience along the way. And probably the reason why this isn't number 1 or 2 on my list is because there is a twist that happens in the middle of the movie. I feel like it's such a tonal turn from the rest of the movie that is kind of surprising. Even though on a second viewing it didn't bother me as much, I do think that is still such a rather big turn that doesn't feel as consistent with the entire movie. And I feel like there are some jump to conclusions that happen at the end of the movie, but nevertheless, I absolutely love Parasite. For number 2, honestly, number 2 and number 1 can go either way. For a long time, number 2 was my favorite movie of the year, and that is Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I saw this movie twice in theaters. The first time I saw it, I had some flaws in regards to its pacing, its characters, its overall feeling of nothingness, that this movie doesn't really go anywhere. On a second viewing, I don't know if it was because I saw in Quentin Tarantino's theater or I saw with an audience that was just so invested in the movie, but I had nearly no flaws with this movie. I thought that this movie is such a subtle masterpiece. Everything from the movie's foreshadowing, the goals from all 3 characters, Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie, who, by the way, all 3 have such amazing performance in this movie. A lot of the elements in this movie are very subtle, and by the end of the movie, when they're all achieved, it's not so noteworthy that they're achieved, but they are, and that's what I do love about this movie. Quentin Tarantino, once again, has such beautiful direction and cinematography in this movie, and the one thing I do love about this movie is that it does take its time and it makes us just sit down and chill with these characters, and because of that, we just eventually love these characters more, and there's such a fantastic payoff at the end of the movie in regards to the Manson murders, but it's so satisfying, especially with everything that we have built up to in this movie, and it reflects the characters in the movie so well and what they eventually desire and want. I do know that some people do have an issue that this movie is pretty much aimless, it goes nowhere and has real no purpose. Personally, for me, on a second viewing, everything just clicked and I had an absolute blast with this movie. And here it is, everyone, number 1 on my list. As I said, this could go either way with number 2 with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but this movie absolutely did move me. I think it is a fantastic story, and it is Jojo Rabbit. Just from the beginning of the movie, not only does this movie visually look stunning, it takes on such a timely topic of kids not really knowing that much and eventually being corrupted by the media, and how does Taika Waititi fit that tone into this movie? Well, making about a 1940s German kid who absolutely adores Adolf Hitler. I think as a satire of this movie, Taika Waititi does have some blows on 1940s Germany, but never really feel like he's beating down on anyone. I think that this is all such smart humor that is such an important message to say about love and hatred. And not only did I love the message that we have in this movie, but the performances from Scarlett Johansson and especially Roman Griffin Davis, who plays young Jojo. I think the 2 of them are absolutely outstanding in this movie and really bring the heart and emotion out of this movie, and this movie just goes to show that good kid actors do exist. I'm looking at you, Playing with Fire. If you have a good kid actor, you have a likable kid performance. And this movie is also a coming-of-age story, and yes, it does follow some familiar beats of this kid eventually having to grow up from loving the Nazi hierarchy, but I think after everything that this movie delivers us, it is done in such a well-mannered, perfect way. And I also forgot this movie is one of the most perfect conflicts ever. A kid who loves Adolf Hitler, who loves the Nazi regime, he finds out his mom is hiding a Jew in his house, and if he tells the Nazis, his mom and almost him will get in trouble. I think that is one of the most clever, smart conflicts in this movie, and I think that Jojo Rabbit handled it tremendously. I absolutely adore Jojo Rabbit. It is easily the number 1 movie of 2019 for me. So that's 2019. That is the end of the decade. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my list? Do you not agree with my list? With everything, and put the comments below, and maybe I'll read it, maybe I won't. Thank you so much for watching, and honestly, this has been a wonderful decade of YouTube making for me. I started this in January 2010, and now it's January 2020. I really never thought I would be here, and I absolutely love doing my movie reviews for you guys the last 3 years. And I'm saying all this because I may be ending my channel and stop producing content, at least the movie reviews, because I'm about to graduate college. I'm gonna have a real job, hopefully, eventually at the end of the summer, and I don't really know what's gonna be in my future, and YouTube is being iffy with their AdSense and payment for me right now, and I'm not really sure if it's worth it. Maybe if there's a change of heart, I might continue doing videos, but this may be it, but we'll see. But if that's not the case, thank you as always for watching, and if you happen to click my last video right over here, and you can click my upcoming video, maybe, over here. Thank you as always for watching, have a great decade, and hope to see you next time.